bom dia a todos, bom dia a todas. Obrigado por mais uma vez participarem de seminários online da Fundação Fernando Henrique Cardoso. Imagino, eu vejo aqui o placar de participantes subindo, o que é uma amostra definitiva de que o tema sobre o qual nós falaremos hoje é um tema, evidentemente, que está no centro das nossas atenções e das nossas preocupações. Ele diz respeito às relações cada vez mais tensas entre China e Estados Unidos e as repercussões que daí decorrem para o conjunto do sistema internacional. Antes de apresentar o nosso convidado, Lanchin, que já esteve conosco aqui na Fundação outras vezes e volta mais uma vez generosamente para dividir o seu conhecimento sobre esse tema conosco, eu gostaria de mostrar as empresas que patrocinam o conjunto de seminários da Fundação Fernando Henrique Cardoso. Eu queria agradecer a todas e a cada uma delas, frisando que sem este apoio, atividades como a que hoje nós realizamos não seriam possíveis. Além disso, eu vou pedir para a produção do programa passar o nosso vídeo institucional. Ele é breve e depois eu farei a apresentação do Lanchin Xiang, já então em inglês.
Encarar desafios civilizatórios inéditos por meio do diálogo e da produção de conhecimento. Promover discussões de qualidade, abertas a diferentes perspectivas e pontos de vista. Ter capacidade de aperfeiçoar a democracia e superar a polarização destrutiva. Entender o papel do Brasil em um mundo de constantes transformações. Num dramático cenário de mudanças climáticas, ser parte da solução. Fazer bom uso da tecnologia para promover altos padrões de governança e um desenvolvimento sustentável e inclusivo. Conhecer o passado, entender o presente e projetar o futuro. Fundação Fernando Henrique Cardoso, um legado em movimento.
Dear Lanchin, it's a great pleasure to have you back on a webinar event, on an online event with us. We still miss you here. Maybe in the future we can have you here in flash, so to speak. Allow me to read parts of your long resume for people to have, I would say, just a flavor of your trajectory, which is a fascinating trajectory, both at the personal and at the professional level. Allow me to read it, parts of it. So, Lanchin Xiang is Professor Emeritus at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva and Distinguished Fellow at the Harry Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. He was, for some years, director of the Institute of Security Policy, which is a think tank in Shanghai linked to the Shanghai University of Political Science and Law. It's a think tank dedicated to dialogues and research around global security policy issues, ranging from climate change to arms control, cybersecurity. I think it's worth stressing that the creation of this think tank is a project of President Xi. So just to give you, to the audience, an idea of how critical, how important this think tank is, a think tank that was headed by Lanchin for quite some time. He was also the third Harry A. Kissinger Chair of Foreign Policy and International Affairs at the Library of Congress in the United States, of course, where he met President Cardoso and Professor Ruti Cardoso back in 2003, right after President Cardoso finished his second term in office. They spent together, I think, 6 months in the Library of Congress. Among many other teaching positions that he had and he still has, he will assume the position, I hope I can pronounce it correctly, the Nghi An Gongzi, professor in international relations at the Hajarat School of International Studies in the Technology University of Singapore. Just to close this brief presentation of Professor Lanxin, he was he's a graduate from Fudan University, one of the most important Chinese university, and he holds a master's and a PhD in European Studies and International Relations from the Po-Nit School of Advanced International Studies, the Johns Hopkins University. The important thing about being a graduate from Johns Hopkins is that Lanxin was amongst the first group of students that was sent to study abroad by then President Deng Xiaoping. So this is our guest speaker today. It's, again, a great pleasure to have you here. Lanxin, the floor is yours for about 10 minutes for introductory remarks, and then we start a conversation. People can send questions that will be selected. Some of them will be conveyed to you, right? So please, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sergio, for inviting me again. I'm sure many times already, including twice in São Paulo before. So I'm very happy to be back, and I think it's also high time for us to discuss the topic you proposed. Of course, is China-US relationship under Trump 2.0. Okay. Now, what I want to explain, well, before I explain the Chinese view on Trump, I want to explain something about Trump himself, or the nature, or my understanding of the nature of Trump as 2.0. Now, in his inaugural speech, Trump essentially has made two important points, which were actually ignored by many, certainly by mainstream media, by liberal Western media, liberal Western elite. The 2 points he made is, first, I no longer want to be the police of the world. That's the end of the story. Okay. Second, I think even more interesting point he's making was also ignored by mainstream press, is that he said, I'm starting right now a common sense revolution. Yeah. I have hardly seen any serious comments or congratulations or to say world leaders in their telegrams, telephone calls with Trump's after inauguration. Only one person actually mentioned that, congratulate him for launching a common sense revolution. Surprisingly, of course, not surprisingly, it's Mr. Putin. No other world leader paid much attention to it. I believe Xi Jinping of China began to pay attention to it since, but very few in China, I'm talking about Chinese elite at the top level, initially understood what Trump really means about common sense revolution. Okay. So here I think now they begin to raise, or I will say, let me interpret what are my understanding of these 2 points before we talk about US-China relations. The first, of course, is that the common sense as a concept coming actually deeply rooted in American history. We should not ignore that. We should not underestimate importance. And the concept starts with Thomas Paine, who was the original, I would say, one of the trigger. His work, only 46 pages, I believe, at the time, 1776. So at that time, it's a huge bestseller in the United States. Every family has a copy. It's called Common Sense. Okay. Now, what that common sense in American context really mean is that don't, which is a language to elite, a ruling elite. At that time is British, of course, colonial ruler. But Trump used that for today's ruling elite. He would call it the liberal, ruling elite, both in the United States and in Europe, and maybe elsewhere as well. Don't ever underestimate ordinary people's sense, the understanding what's best for them, for their own interest. In other words, we should never trust people who try to tell us what's good for me. Instead, we have to, this is what the foundation for Trump's MAGA movement from the very beginning. And he played extremely well on that theme. Okay, that is the entire American system, anti-American elite are losing common sense. They become, they don't really care about people. See, this is the theme. But it caught up with the majority Americans now, surprisingly. But the second point is that also for international affairs, he said, why should the United States get involved in other people's business, spending money, spending blood, and everything else? So he is a bit more than isolationist. You see, America had an isolationist history, tradition. But here, I will say, Trump approach for international affairs is more than that. He is not, I wouldn't call him an isolationist in the traditional sense, because he still want to lead, but he want to lead without using American resources and American, both financial and human resources. So he would like to fundamentally modify the entire global system since the Second World War by pushing back the responsibility of regional security to regional players, rather than, Americans take over everything. So that is quite a revolution. That's, you see, this is, from my perspective, or from Chinese reading of this, is quite a revolutionary move here. So how that relate to US-China relations, I will say, in the short term, it's a huge disruption, disturbance. We already seen that, because China for Donald Trump is a #1 rival in terms of economic activities, for sure. There is no doubt about that. But on the other hand, I would say in medium and the long run, Trump is a very good news, okay, from a Chinese point of view. Three things I think stands out for Trump 2.0, which Chinese would appreciate and China would feel easier to deal with him. One is he does not give a damn to ideological argument. Okay. Under a Biden administration, for example, you see that Biden actually defined great power relations as democracy versus autocracy. Now, when you define great power international system that way, the military confrontation is almost inevitable if you keep it defined in that way, because you are not doing practical issues. You see, even during the Cold War, despite the ideological difference, the Soviet Union and the United States tried to work out a lot of pragmatic issues, arms control, nuclear, and so on and so forth. But Biden administration seems to me is far more dangerous from Chinese point of view in that way of defining great power relations. Okay, rallying, like-minded, as they say, allies, basically making the ideological war against China. So this, under Biden, it is a real Cold War. Okay, both in terms of ideology, but also in terms of military deterrence. And I believe we are very close at some dangerous military accident and confrontation during that 4 years, especially after Nancy Pelosi visit to Taiwan. Now, Trump does not care about ideology at all. This is the first time in my lifetime, I see an American president basically saying, great power relations are, are important. We need to keep peace. How to keep peace? Don't do ideological fight. Okay. So what we need to do is not to, what Trump says, we don't have to step on another great power's red line. We should avoid doing that. In the case of US-China relationship here, we're talking about, of course, is a Taiwan issue. See, Trump view on Taiwan is a good news so far. He's not making the equation like a Biden, even Europeans are doing. Today's Ukraine war in Ukraine, tomorrow is Taiwan. See, they equate these two things, which historically these two things has zero link, but they're making essentially an ideological argument saying West must defend Taiwan just because Taiwan is a democratic system. Now that is a war talk from Beijing's point of view. Eventually you push China to seek military solutions rather than the other way around. Okay. The second thing I think Trump is good news for China is he is somebody who basically says, I will avoid by whatever means for a real military confrontation with anybody. I'm not going to do any overseas adventure anymore. This is the argument I mentioned. It's he stopped the American role as a police of the world. Okay. So that means he recognized a regional, sphere influence at the regional level. Not necessarily a bad term when you talk about sphere influence. Europeans are supposed to take care. But are Europeans poor? Why Europeans refuse to pay more than 2% of GDP to defend themselves? All these issues has been, bugging the transatlantic relations for decades. And Trump is somebody who came out saying, well, let's do it. You have to, if you don't do it, I'm leaving. Okay. So that approach, it's also makes sense. Makes sense. Will, in my view, will dramatically reduce international tension rather than increase it. Like a NATO enlargement, all that stuff, which in part at least triggered the war of Ukraine. And the third thing I think Trump liked to do is economic rebalancing. Now, that we understand that. Just look at the data, look at figures. I think Chinese have no problem, really, in dealing with Trump on the issue of rebalancing. Because the trade imbalance between US and China has gone basically out of control in the sense. And even Chinese realize that. The gap is too big. No country will be able to sustain that gap. So the question, of course, is how are we going to deal with this? Now, Trump tried in the first a few months, he tried this high-handed approach. He used it in at 1.0 at the first term of the president, try to high-handed, then retreat, high-handed, then retreat. But this time he has gone a little bit too far. He underestimated Chinese capability of resisting. So we see it's reaching an absurd level for at least a month or so, 140, percentage of trade, which actually is not even tariff. This is called embargo, right? If you really do that, that's the economic embargo. But what Trump did not understand in this area is that using tariff may not be able to bring the American manufacturing industry back for very simple reason of comparative advantage. There is no way. American labor is just too expensive to begin with, and they're not very efficient. Even Taiwanese, they built this TCM. They're a big company. They say American labor is very low quality in general, and they pay too much. So this is not going to happen, really. Chinese know that. I began to think that Trump people also began to realize that high-handed approach, rely upon tariff, is not going to work. So what eventually might happen, I think the Chinese have done this pretty well this time with Trump. We negotiate, we patient, we resisted at the beginning, and we end up just today. We heard the good news already. We had the good news in Geneva before, but today they actually reached a real framework of a 55% benchmark for tariff on China. Chinese, my view is that's okay. It's acceptable. It's not a big deal.
55,
Yes, I think that's the framework right now. Just
but
reach.
55, you think the Chinese authorities believe 55 is okay? Because
It's my view
55,
is
of course, is lower than 145, but it's still a lot. It's almost an
I
impediment to trade between the two countries.
I
What would be the,
I think yes.
go
No,
ahead.
no,
But my
yes, no,
question
no.
is,
Yeah.
how do Chinese authorities see the
Right,
scenario in which you have for a longer period of time
right.
such a high tariff on imports and exports, depending on the way you're looking at it?
Well,
What kind of damage that can this provoke in Chinese economy? What kind of tools Chinese government has to respond to that, economically speaking, and whether
right.
that strikes a sort of nationalistic chord
Mhm.
that
Right.
might play into the hands of the Chinese authorities at this time around.
Right. Well, I think this agreement we just heard today actually reflect a wins on both sides in the sense that United States, you see, the price US have to pay is to lower their export restriction on chips and high techs. Now, from a Chinese point of view, a higher tariff is expected anyway. With Geneva, we have 35%, I believe. That is at that tentative agreement. Now, US want to impose a little bit more, still acceptable in as a quid pro quo to what China really needs even more urgently. That is the more relaxation on the chips, on the high tech area. That's why the Commerce Secretary was there in London. He was not there in Geneva. He is the one in charge of export control as well. So here, I think we have to get into all the detail. That's what I just heard the news.
Yeah.
I think Trump just announced in his social media account. But my guess is China considered it's high, but it's acceptable if we get a quid pro quo on the high tech restriction issues. So this is, I think, is yes,
But the thing is,
yeah,
that will hinder export to the biggest market in the world, which is the United States
uh,
market.
sure.
Chinese economy will have to find other markets to compensate for the loss in the United States. That means
That is
Chinese products will flood other markets around the world, and that will sort of disturb trade relations in system
it's
in the
of course
system, in the economic global system.
sure.
Don't you agree with that?
Well, I agree, but only partially. Remember what China tried to do is no longer rely upon a lower end, lower value added manufacturing products. What they want to do is a transition into a more high value added uh, products using high tech, using AI. China, according to all the data we see, has a highest rate of manufacturing industry using AI. See, far more than United States even. So we're going to have a lot of, we're going to have a transition. You are referring to are the lower end manufacturing consumer products, basically. Okay, that has been the drivers for the past decades. Now, these industries still there, but the importance of these products or production sector will sharply decrease as we getting more and more high-tech capabilities. This is why the chips and the other high-tech development is crucially important for this transition for China into a different level of international trade power, rather than we only worry about the lower end where there is no chance you're going to win, with this. But remember that there is another thing about the lower end consumer goods. We do have markets almost everywhere. I mean, because think
You mean the
about it.
domestic market, our internal market?
No, we have an internal, but we also still we have a quite a wide global reach, almost every continent. Okay, depends
But
on
for
how
instance,
Africa.
electric vehicles.
Well,
Electric vehicles is not an
EV is one
example
thing.
of a lower
Sure,
end
sure,
in terms
sure.
of aggregate added
EV
value,
is
right?
one example, yes, only just one of the examples. But the EV is not a whole thing. We have a lot of other stuff. It's quite a dramatic things are happening now in China in the high tech area, including including AI. You see the AI sector, China suddenly jumped to the at least advanced level, right? Surprise everybody in the world. So what I'm trying to say,
Go ahead.
yes, go ahead.
No. Finish
No,
what you're saying.
yeah, what I'm ending my conversation here is that China worry much less about Trump trade war than worry about the if there is a danger of a real hard power military confrontation with the United States. If we had a war over Taiwan or South China Sea with the United States, we don't even talk about trade, right? That will be a real disruption of all China's external or the international trade and external economic activities. So nobody want to see that. But under Trump, we can be quite feeling assured that next few years under Trump administration, there will be no war between China and the United States. That is a real certainty. See, everybody's talking about Trump's problem, uncertainty. Sure, he's erratic, he's uncertain, but for China, that issue, it's certain. Therefore, it's much easier for Chinese to make, strategies and policies, not just focusing on the short-term things. Tariff issue it's a short-term things. Last point, if you don't allow me, about tariff. Trump is launching tariff war on everybody. You see, so therefore, it's not like a Trump 1.0. That trade war primarily dealing with China. Remember, we have several rounds of hard bargaining, negotiation with Trump. But this time he's launching war with everybody.
Yeah, but China's a special case, right?
Yes.
The
At
thing,
least China.
my question
Go ahead,
based on the assumption that the next 4 years, 3 years and a half will be years of stable
Right.
economic relationship between China and the United States, with Trump saying, "Well, I'm hands off in terms of policing the world." Would the Chinese government, in your view, be tempted, so to speak, to test the waters in Taiwan and South China,
Why they do that?
South China Sea?
Yeah, but I really don't see, this is never in their intention. These are invented by American think tanks, American Biden administration in particular. They even had a date for when Xi Jinping is going to attack. Remember last time I had a debate with Bonnie Glaser, they believe there's some kind of, possibility, but I don't, CIA director, Navy, general, Air Force, everybody has a deadline. Say Xi Jinping is going to launch doing it. The question they never ask is what's the benefit for China to have to launch a war like that? I'm talking about unilaterally. Now, you see, when I said under Biden administration, it's even more dangerous because we don't know. We couldn't figure out what Biden people are doing. They apparently try to push for Taiwan independence. At least that's the judgment. Biden had 4 times he made a tongue slip, so to speak, 4 times, which is not tongue slip anymore.
I mean, he had,
We commit
yeah,
to
he made
defending them.
many. He made,
Yes. No,
he made
but the
many tongue
problem is
slips, yeah.
he 4 times he said we're going to commit to the United States defending Taiwan. That is the message we're really going to push Chinese thinking we should do military operation now before it's a drift away, because Americans are really seriously pushing for Taiwan independence. Now, if Trump does not do that, you see, the other point I want to make is that I even believe there is a chance that Trump and the Xi Jinping, if Xi Jinping is still in power the next few years, but they might
Very
have
likely.
they might have a chance even to strike a real deal, a new deal on Taiwan. I've been promoting that for many years. I call it number 4 communique. Remember, we have 3 joint communique over Taiwan, but that 3 communique used to be the foundation of stability Taiwan Strait is no longer working very well. We need the 4th one to make it very clear that the United States never going to push for Taiwan independence, which Trump has to make that commitment. Okay, then Chinese can say, okay, if you do that, then we don't have to commit to a military operation, because it does not. Think about the Chinese national interest. There is no real interest for them to, what you say, test waters. Test what water? You mean invade the Philippines in South China Sea? No, it's never going to happen. And just launch a unprovoked operation on Taiwan? No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. What I'm trying to say is Trump's messaging method is working with Chinese, unlike Biden people. Okay, the way he's signaling, his messaging basically says he's not really care much about Taiwan independence at all. Okay, Trump said many, many times in private, we know that. Yes, he does not really care. He never used the analogy of Taiwan versus Ukraine, for example. He criticized that nonsense, right? So all the signals coming from Trump on Taiwan issue is encouraging. I hope Xi and Trump, alongside the trade war, other deal. Trump liked to make a grand bargaining. Remember, that's Trump. Trump liked to make a grand bargaining, including strategic issues as well. So Taiwan could be something on the table. Yes.
It's clear that China has adopted, and it seems to
Yes.
be keeping this cool-headedness in its relations to the U.S.
Right.
Internally, domestically, is there some kind of U.S. bashing promoted by the Communist Party, saying, I mean, the U.S. Trying to block our ascent as a superpower, blah, 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 that kind of thing, in order to mobilize a nationalistic sentiment among the Chinese population?
Not quite. Not quite. I put this way. If Trump people or Chinese population and elite, they both recognize that what Trump is doing is not dealing with China from a high moral ground. Okay, this is what every previous American administration been doing since the founding of the People's Republic since 1949. Basic point is you are not a democracy. You are one-party system. You are the fundamental issues. They never really recognize Chinese system and the Communist Party as being a legitimate system. Okay. So legitimacy is at the core of the issue. Trump is the first American president, in my memory, who never questioning the legitimacy issue. I'm not saying his cabinet members don't do it. Get Rubio, we have, or some others still talking about human rights, Tibet, Xinjiang. Remember, Rubio is somebody who loved those kind of stuff. He claimed to be a Cuban refugee, which is a lie, as we know that later on.
Can I ask you
go
to
ahead.
connect
Yeah,
this issue of legitimacy in international relations, in the
Right.
bilateral relations between the US and China,
right,
and your most recent book which is about importance of legitimacy. Let me read
yes,
the title.
yes,
The Quest for Legitimacy in Chinese Politics. So
right.
seeing this as a sort of a one coin with two faces, legitimacy, external face, legitimacy, internal face. How do
Right.
they go together or not?
Well, see, my view is the Chinese understanding legitimacy is opposite. It's quite different from the Western view on legitimacy since European Enlightenment. Before Enlightenment, European view on legitimacy more or less the same, really similar. If you go all the way back to even ancient Greeks and all the way back to even Italian Renaissance. Okay, now legitimacy is not something that defined by the arrangement of power relationship within a system, which is invented during Enlightenment. Of course, it's called the divisions of power. Montesquieu, I think he's the leading figure. Somehow power can be divided into three compartments, and then they balance each other. That's the concept, right? But in Chinese history, or throughout Chinese history, power is organic, cannot be mechanically divided. No matter what you say, power is an integrated thing. Now, so how do you define legitimacy? Not by division of power. You see, that's what the democratic theory, they're attacking China, because we don't have a division of power, therefore you don't have democracy, therefore you are not legitimate. You see, that's the logic of argument for a couple of 100 years now against Chinese system. But the Chinese concept legitimacy really means it's called deeds-based. It's a delivering. Let's say you even have emperor, even you have an emperor, if he can deliver the benefits to majority, not everybody, majority population, improving their livelihood, guarantee their security, and keep a society quiet, safe, and so on and so forth. That's the legitimacy. It's called the deeds-based rather than system-based concepts. So here, I think we have reaching a historic stage now that people must understand this Chinese understanding of legitimacy in order to understand how Chinese system actually worked. Not just sit aside, basically attacking by using a particular perspective, which is based on Western culture and history, saying,
Interesting.
so this is where the difference is. Yes, yes.
Let me following the same line of reasoning. It
Sure.
seems to me that what you're saying to us is that you have a very self-confident Chinese officials believing that time is on their side. And this is the basic assumption behind this cool-headedness in the way they deal with the US. That leads me to a question that was asked by someone who is watching us. The last name is Muniz. And the question is, and I'm not asking you to guess this, but to say to the best of your knowledge, what Chinese officials, how would they respond to that question? How long will it take for China to surpass the United States in military capabilities and in the economic field as well? Two questions.
I will say in economic terms, in terms of GDP, let's say GDP, probably, within 10 years or so, yes. Militarily, I have grave doubts. Because the problem is that China does not have a global geostrategic agenda in the sense, you see, we're not replacing, there is no intention for China replacing the United States to be the world police. It would be absurd for any Chinese leader even to think about that. To be a world police, not only you have to have a military bases everywhere, you have to have your troops everywhere, and you have to spend a huge amount. United States military budget is all 12 leading countries combined. Now, do you want to do that? No, we don't want to. See, Trump still increased military budget. I'm not saying he's not doing. He wants to keep that military, dominance in the world, but he does not like a war. So what his language is, I want to maintain peace through strength. That's Trump's language. But for Chinese point of view, that's okay. That's okay, not a big deal.
Allow me to push you back a little on this idea that the Chinese don't have a geostrategic objectives in the world. Let's take, for instance, Latin America.
Sure.
I mean, there is I wouldn't say a confrontation,
Sure.
but there is a dispute for influence here. And influence meaning investment in infrastructure, control of ports, of the Panama Canal, and that kind of thing. How that reconcile with the idea that the Chinese don't have a geostrategic, not to mention the Belt and Road Initiative, Africa, and all that?
No, remember, what I'm trying to explain is geostrategic global reach means that was backed by military force, which is what the United States been doing, or the European historic empire has been doing since the Roman time. Okay, now you need to have a Roman legion everywhere to maintain your position. This is approach Chinese would never do. This is the point I'm making. Does not mean China are not doing, they do not have a global reach strategy for economic development or economic, policies, which they've been doing, quite a bit already. Not just Latin America, but Africa, Middle East, almost everywhere. I mean, it's not even possible today to talk about economic development without Chinese input. I don't see anywhere you can say that you can exclude Chinese input, but that does not mean China will be guarantee this kind of influence by military force. That requires you to be a gendarme of the world, right? We're not going to be a gendarme of the world. That's for sure. So I do not see a huge problem if you don't, dominate other people. You see, historically, that also means Chinese never have a colonial tradition. Okay, colonial traditions invented mainly by Europeans. Colonial, well, Brazil itself is one example of the Portuguese. Colonial means you send your own people to overseas land, which is, the land is not connected with your land, right? You resettle them, then you eliminate locals, basically. Okay, Brazilian has done a wonderful job not doing that, but the United States did, and many other people did, right? The Canadians did. So that tradition has never been part of the Chinese history.
But China has the tradition of tributary states, right? Countries
yes,
from which it is extract income and in rent and wealth. Um,
Yes.
I think we have an agreement on that, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
In
Yes.
the thing is, Latin America is an important source of raw
Sure.
material to China. Up to now,
Sure.
this has been the basically the pillar of the relationship between Latin
Right.
America and
Sure. Sure.
you said at the beginning that the sphere of influences is not a bad thing, right? That implies that, let's say, the so-called Western Hemisphere is United States sphere of influence. China will not try to mess with the Western Hemisphere. But if
Yeah.
the US government,
Right.
for strategic reasons,
Right.
try to curb Chinese influence here by blocking its access to raw material, to infrastructure, putting pressure on countries in Argentina, for instance, because of the satellite station in the south of Argentina. Do you think this as potential sources of tensions that might escalate in the future, or you completely rule out
Well,
the possibility of
no, it's possible.
escalation?
No, it's possible. It's always possible, not just Latin America. But remember, in Latin America, the key thing is how strong is the remnants of the so-called Monroe Doctrine. Now, my own view is Monroe Doctrine is moribund, if not dead. Okay, it's not really there anymore with the Latin. Now, if the Monroe Doctrine is no longer functioning the way they used to, um, I doubt Latin American countries will cater to what Americans want them to do. Just word by word. It's not going to happen. It does not serve Latin American countries' national interests. So in that sense, I do believe that now Chinese Americans at one point try to say it's a Chinese penetration into Latin America that helped kill the Monroe Doctrine. You know, which that's one thesis I heard directly from people in the State Department in charge of Latin American affairs many years ago. But now they even know this is a very lame argument. It is the Latin American themselves. They don't want to keep that
Right,
Monroe Doctrine anymore.
right,
Not even Mexico. Think about it, even Mexico. you know, not to mention this Central America and the Latin America. It's not going to happen. So you see, that depends on how the Latin American regime, how they function. I do not believe it's going to be a big deal. It's going to create friction for sure with Argentina. If Argentina moved too much to the right, maybe. But even merely himself, changed mind. Toned down dramatically his anti-Chinese language. So in the end, I think it's national interest that counts.
right.
That's my
It's
view.
basically the same
Yeah,
question,
right,
which
right.
is being asked by Claudia Trevisan. Claudia
Yeah,
Trevisan
yes,
has been a Brazilian correspondent to Beijing for
right.
quite a long time, and now she is head of or vice president of Chinese Brazilian Council,
Oh, yes,
Business Council.
wonderful,
And the
wonderful.
question is, it's the same question, but instead of taking Latin American only, a more global view. The question is, some analysts in the US believe Trump favors a worldview with the spheres of influence, with the
Right.
division among the United States, China, and Russia. How does Chinese leadership see this view, considering the country's global economic interests?
I don't believe Trump necessarily want to have uh, division sphere influence between U.S., China, and Russia. Uh, he doesn't like the EU. That's we understand. Does not mean he would be happily give Europe to Russia. It's not going to happen. Europeans will not do that. Europeans are strong enough to resist Russia. I put it this way: sphere influence historically is a bad term for sure. It's not a good term. But here, what I'm trying to say is what Trump basically saying, I rather leave the affairs to the regional players. They need to work out their problems. It's not us, it's not we, the United States, should put our nose into everything, and we also pay for it, and also pay for the blood for it, not just the money. So this is the fundamental, point that Trump is making, and on that point, I think it makes great sense. I really don't think he wants to just leave everything to Russia on the European side of the story, or leave everything in Asia just to China. That's not what he means. He will say China, Japan, and many others, they need to work out something, right? Also Koreans, 2 Koreans, and ASEAN countries, the Southeast Asian countries, they need to work out things among themselves rather than count on us. Just whatever happens, we will get in there to defend you. This is what Trump, I call it a global strategic retrenchment. That's what Trump wants to do. Not just the question of saving money, but he really believed it. Philosophically, he believed this. This goes back to American history. I'm talking about, common sense again. It's a quite, has traditionally makes sense. Yes.
Another related question. The question comes from Marcelo Regunaga. And the question is the following. Trump is challenging seriously the multilateral system, WTO, climate change, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Does these issues are not a main concern for China?
Sure. There is no doubt. Remember, China's economic development benefit primarily, besides the hardworking, people and the Deng Xiaoping reform, all that, but international environment, which is a multilateral economic system of basically it's an integrated international economic system, which was invented by the United States to begin with, right? They used to be called the Bretton Woods system. American and the British together founded in 1947, right, in New Hampshire. Now, the issue here is we are used to that system. They call it multilateral, WTO, WHO, and many other systems. China, historically, I'm talking about since the founding PRC, it take a long time for Chinese to understand multilateralism because we were not even invited to the UN, right? China has only entered the UN after kicking Taiwan out in 1970s, right? So we had no experience multilateralism. And multilateralism is something Chinese historically don't trust for a long time. Meaning they think it's a wasting of time. These are the talking forums. But since the 1970s and 80s, I would say particularly in the 90s when we joined WTO, Chinese really began to have a sense, the benefits of multilateral system, which work in favor of the Chinese national interests pretty well, even better than many bilateral systems. So Chinese are getting there, but as soon as Chinese get so warm, they fall in love with multilateralism. Americans says, bye-bye, we are out. So this has happened almost the same time. So China has to readjust to, let's say, protectionism, many other unilateral actions, particularly from the United States, but also European and many others. So yes, it is a grave concern. Chinese prefer to keep that system alive. Xi Jinping was the one who actually, maybe the last one, publicly defending free trade at the Davos a few years ago, which, it almost sounds ironic, right?
How engaged
Right.
China is in rebuilding the multilateral system on new
Right.
basis, and
Okay.
how that can be a source of
Right.
tension between China and the United States. Think about financial arrangements outside of the dollar
Sure.
domain. That kind of initiative that is seen as unacceptable by Trump and his
Sure.
administration. What is the strategy, the Chinese strategy, to take the opportunity to rebuild the multilateral system on new basis, but at the same time taking into
Right.
consideration that that might trigger
Right.
uh, uh, some sort of complicated relationship with the U.S.
Well, I try to make two brief points on this. One is China is a newcomer to multilateralism, relatively speaking, since the Second World War. We are out of the multilateral system, including UN system, right? Until 1970s. So we were isolated. We never participate in the multilateral system. But since they participate in the systems, especially since 80s and 90s, after joining WTO and so on, they began to realize the importance, the benefits of multilateralism. So China converted, so to speak, into a true believer of multilateral diplomacy, uh, uh, multilateralism for global governance. Okay. Now, since Trump now want to destroy almost everything, okay, he not only want to destroy the UN related system. Okay, I'm talking about WHO, maybe even WTO, and the many other, climate change and all that stuff. So China will not follow Trump's example, obviously, because on that issue, China's with the majority, which is obviously to the benefit of Chinese national prestige and also national interests. Okay, but the one you're talking about, the currency arrangement, these are known as a minilateralism. These are not multilateralism. That is a small group of countries joined together for a specific purpose of doing something. Here we are talking about the BRICS. Okay, now Brazil also part of it. Now, if the BRICS can be the foundation or forum eventually for a de-dollarization movement, if that's successful, China will have interest. Can you hear me? Okay. China will have an interest certainly to reduce the international status of US dollar. Okay. And they learned a lot from Putin this time, by the way. When Putin was sanctioned, especially Putin's kick out of the dollar payment system. Well, China has to be preparing, saying, what, what if this similar kind of stuff, come to China? So these contingency issues pushed China to organize, or hopefully they can do something to reduce the use of dollar as an international currency. But the real issue here is what the United States are going to do, okay, with the dollar. My understanding is Trump people really want to do is not a tariff. What they want to do is called New Mar-a-Lago Accord, which is played on the Plaza Accord, where the Japanese was dragged into, unfortunately, many decades ago. To force other major trading partners to aggressively appreciate their currency, and also to keep holding dollar assets as a central bank, reserve. These are the two demands. So China have some cards in their pockets here, right? On both
Very,
accounts, they can push the United States. They can put pressure on the U.S. Yes, go ahead.
very good. Final question
Yeah,
to close this very interesting conversation.
sure.
Um, is the Russia-China partnership no limit partnership, as has been declared by
Yes.
Putin and Xi Jinping in February 2022. How far this can go, and how does China see this rapprochement between Washington and Moscow?
It's a misinterpretation anyway. Yeah, I was the only Chinese invited to the BBC wonderful TV series about Putin. It's called about the war, the Ukraine war. I try to explain that. Uh, So-called no limits is misinterpreted as we sanctioned, we allow Russia to do almost everything. We would not. We don't have a bottom line saying that what you cannot do. That's not true.